The Zeal to Save, a My Hero Academia fanfiction, written by Addie. Chapter 0, Beginnings. The night darkened to the east of Narrated City. A faint tang of gasoline lingered in the air. Some areas were still under construction, cleaning up the debris and rubble from the chaos that had unfolded days ago. Hiroshi Tanaka, an old man in his early 50s, was heading back home with a bag of groceries, taking a puff of his almost ash cigarette. He coughed up the smoke a moment later, but that didn't stop him from lighting another one. This one went out sooner than expected. Blaring news of newfound casualties under the rubble, a television shop drew his attention as he passed. Numerous villains have been captured, including former hero Lady Nagant, who had escaped and joined the dark side after being sentenced to lifelong imprisonment. Japan is going through dark times, the female commented. A hero turned rogue? That's new. He didn't stay to listen, unlike some locals. Not his circus, not his monkeys. Closer to home, Hiroshi glanced at familiar shopkeepers already closing up for the day. Oi, Ichiro, Hiroshi called out to the young man, the co-owner of the infamous Hopper's Cafe in their city. Closing so soon? It's barely 8 p.m. Hey, Mr. Hiroshi, Ichiro replied. Yeah, I know it's not our usual closing time, but you know how it is out there right now. Heroes fighting all these villains who just spawned out of nowhere, some going rogue, and all that chaos. I heard even All Might almost got his ass kicked by some super strong dude, his brother Jiro added, flipping the open sign to, sorry we're closed. But I guess you won't care, will ya? The old man scoffed, rolling his eyes. It's not that I don't care. I'm just not crying tears of joy that All Might won. It's nothing heroes can't handle on their own. The bald man raised an eyebrow. You trust them that much? He paused, before asking the more important question. Or you're too absorbed in your misery to care. Hiroshi's shoulders stiffened, his cigarette trembling between two fingers. He could almost hear the sirens again, see the twisted wreck on the roadside like it happened just yesterday and not 10 years ago. Mother-son duo killed in a car crash on the outskirts of Narahata City. The smoke burned his lungs. He exhaled hard, as if the bitterness could choke down the thought clawing up again. If only he hadn't let his boy drive that night. It's nothing the heroes can't handle, he repeated, his voice more resigned. The Hata brothers realized they had raised a sensitive topic. Don't be so hard on yourself, Mr. Tanaka, Jiro consoled, putting his hand on the old man's shoulder. You should focus on teaching the little kids about, what is it, karate? It's jujutsu, damn idiot, Hiroshi huffed, his eyes squinting in disapproval. It's much different from karate, or any other martial art for that matter. Sure, Jiro muttered, throwing his hands up in surrender. Anyway, get home safe, Mr. Tanaka. Streets aren't what they used to be. Hiroshi grunted in reply and shifted his grocery bag higher on his arm, the plastic crinkling in the cold night air. His cigarette burned low, orange tip glowing against the dark street as he walked further east, where the lights thinned and the alleyways grew quieter. That was when he heard it. Not the usual city noise, the hum of traffic, the distant laughter of drunks spilling out of a bar, but a faint, stifled sound, a cough, maybe a sniffle. He slowed, frowning. Behind the half-demolished construction fencing and piles of rubble, something moved. He almost kept walking. Not his business. The city was full of strays, cats, dogs, even kids sometimes, scraping by where the heroes couldn't reach. But when the sound came again, thin and ragged, Hiroshi swore under his breath and turned toward it. In the shadows, huddled against a wall, was a girl. Couldn't have been older than 9 or 10. Her clothes were filthy, her face gaunt, her arms wrapped tight around her knees as though making herself smaller would shield her from the world. Hiroshi's chest tightened. The look in her eyes, a hollow, glassy emptiness, made his cigarette feel heavy all of a sudden. He'd seen that reflection before, staring back at him from his mirror, but never in a child. The old man took a step closer, trying to get a better look, seeking recognition. Maybe her parents were looking for her. but the raw blisters on her feet told him enough. She hadn't just wandered from the next street over. She'd walked a long way, and alone. The girl heard the rustle of a plastic bag and looked up, her body immediately tensing up when she saw him. She got up with shaking legs, tears pooling in her eyes as she pointed her fingers in the shape of a gun. Don't come closer. I'll shoot." Hiroshi stopped in his tracks, observing her stance and face. Purple hair, pink eyes like faded glass, skin pale as chalk. He didn't recognize her face. No one like her lived in this neighborhood. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you. You're lying. Go away." The old man slowly lifted his free hand, palm open, the grocery bag hanging loosely from the other. "Easy, kid. If you were gonna shoot, you'd have done it already." His voice came low, not sharp, closer to the steady tone he used when teaching his youngest students how to fall without breaking their arms. The girl's trembling fingers wavered, her weapon shaking as tears threatened to spill. "I ain't here to drag you off," he went on, crouching down so he wasn't looming over her, grunting as his joints protested. The plastic bag crinkled as he set it on the ground between them. He nudged it closer with his hand, letting the smell of steamed buns and miso drift through the cool night air. "See? Groceries. You want something to eat? It's yours. No tricks." Her eyes darted between him and the bag, suspicion winning out over hunger for now. "You don't trust me. Fine. Smart kid." He rested his elbows on his knees, staying in that squat, giving her space. "But you look about ready to drop, and it's a long night to be shivering in the dirt." The girl's lips pressed tight. She didn't lower her hands, but her fingers twitched, loosening their aim. "Tell you what," Hiroshi said, softer this time, as though speaking to a spooked animal. "I'll sit right here. You can eat and keep your little gun on me. Fair deal?" For a long stretch, the only sound was the shutters closing and the faint rattle of construction fencing in the wind. The girl's stomach growled, loud enough that even she flinched at the betrayal. Her fingers trembled, still pointed like a weapon, but her eyes kept flicking to the bag. Hiroshi didn't move. He just sat there, crouched in the dust, letting her decide. At last, she lowered her hands, not all the way, but enough to reach forward. She snatched the bag, nearly tearing it open in her rush, and dug out a bun. The first bite was too fast. She choked, coughed, tears streaming down her face, as though her body couldn't decide if it wanted food or air more. Hiroshi exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself not to reach for her. Kids didn't want pity, they wanted space. "Slow down," he murmured. "Nobody's taken it from you." But she didn't slow. She devoured one, then another, stuffing the third into her cheek until crumbs spilt down her chin. The salt of her tears mixed with the steam, and when her hands began to shake too hard to hold the bread, she dropped it and pressed her fists into her eyes. I'm not supposed to cry," she hiccuped between sobs, voice breaking on the words. Hiroshi moved closer, just enough that his shadow fell across her. He rested a heavy hand on the ground beside her knees, anchoring himself there so she could feel the nearness without being crowded. "Who told you that?" he asked, gentle but firm. The girl just shook her head, shoulders curling tighter around her small frame. Hiroshi let the silence hang, then gave a quiet grunt, almost like a sigh. "Then they were wrong. Crying just means you've been holding too much in. Let some of it out. Makes the rest easier to carry." Her sobs came harder after that, ugly and raw, but she didn't run. And when her head finally tipped against his arm, Hiroshi stayed still, letting her lean without comment, the scent of smoke and steamed buns wrapping around them. Minutes later, her sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths. Hiroshi gently brushed his fingers through her hair, and surprisingly, she didn't pull away. "What's your name, kiddo?" "Mahou Murasaki," she replied meekly. Hiroshi hummed low in his throat. Not quite a word, more like a sound to ground her. All right, Mahou, you don't gotta say anything else right now. Her small shoulders shook again, and she pressed her face harder into his sleeve. She tried to pick up the steamed bun off the ground, as if it would be the last meal she would ever have, but he stopped her hand. I'll get you another one, don't worry, he said after a pause, his voice low and steady. You're tired, I'll find you a place to rest. That's it. Nothing else you gotta worry about tonight. For the first time, her glassy pink eyes lifted to his face, searching for the catch, the trick. When she didn't find one, her trembling eased, just slightly. He took that as an invitation to scoop her in his arms and take her home for the night. She didn't dare peek out, as if afraid someone would take her away. The evening grew darker, and most shops now closed. Soon the familiar apartment complex came into view, a 4-story building with small apartments on each floor with balconies. The old man carried the little girl to the elevator, who finally peeked out from his chest, instantly tensing up again. I don't want to go in there, she mumbled, clutching his shirt like her life depended on it. It's just an elevator, he tried to reassure her. No, that leads to the doctor. Her voice cracked with panic, tiny fists bunching tighter. Hiroshi stilled immediately, his muscles rigid. Doctor? He quickly shook the question away. It wasn't the time. Hey, easy kiddo, no doctors, not tonight. His voice was firm but gentle, putting his skills from teaching and comforting little kids to use. She shook her head against his chest, still trembling. The old man sighed in resignation. It wasn't working. All right, he adjusted the grocery bag on his arm and stepped back from the elevator, turning toward the stairwell. Then we'll take the stairs. Nothing wrong with that, he smiled, adjusting her in his arms. Her grip loosened just a fraction, looking at him with an expression of both gratitude and confusion, as if she'd never had anyone be nice to her, but that can be dealt with later. Hiroshi carried her up each creaking step, his breath steady and sure, knees protesting, but his body wasn't all worn out. By the second-floor landing, her cheek pressed against his shirt again, the fabric damp from earlier tears. You promise no doctor, she whispered, voice small and wobbly. He said simply, without hesitation, just a warm meal and a place to sleep, that's it. The man could tell she was starting to relax now. That was a good sign. Reaching the 3rd floor, his knees complained, but his pace didn't falter. He put her down, fishing the keys from his pocket and nudging the door open with his shoulder. The small apartment greeted him with its familiar clutter. Stacks of newspapers in one corner, a half-finished crossword on the kitchen table, the faint scent of green tea and old wood that never quite left. It wasn't much, but it was home. He carried the girl inside and shut the door with a kick. For a moment, he wondered what she'd think of the place. Worn to Tommy Mac's, second-hand furniture. The ashtray still crowded with cigarette butts, he kept putting off cleaning. But then, her small hand tugged at his sleeve. She looked up at him, wide-eyed. I can stay here? For a moment, he couldn't answer. The way her voice cracked on the question, like she'd been bracing herself for a no, hit harder than he liked. He looked down and placed a steady hand on her head. Yeah, kiddo, you can stay, he said quietly. This place isn't much, but it's safe. You don't have to worry now. Her wide eyes flickered, wet and uncertain, before she gave a shaky nod. He pulled the blanket from the back of the couch and draped it over her shoulders, smoothing it down like he used to do with his son when he was little. He set the grocery bag on the counter. Let's see if we can't fix you a real meal. And that's how it began. Just a tired, lonely man and a frightened girl with nowhere else to go. From that night, she wasn't just a stranger he'd carried up 3 flights of stairs. He had to look after her, and found himself willing to do it. At first, he tried the simplest path, asking around. He stopped by Hopper's Cafe more often, asking them if any of their regulars had mentioned a missing child or noticed a girl wandering the streets. The brothers shook their heads, sharing a quick look of concern. One promised to ask a few customers, but nothing ever came back. The girl remained silent through much of it, watching him guardedly.
She ate what he gave her, though sparingly, always with a strange reluctance, as though accepting kindness was dangerous. By the third day, Hiroshi realized he couldn't keep her hidden in his apartment forever. He steeled himself and decided it was time to go to the police. However, when he told her, her reaction was immediate and violent. She thrashed in his grip, her small fists striking his chest and arms, her voice breaking into a scream that rattled through the narrow hallway of his building. "No, no police!" Her heel caught his shin, and she fought like a cornered animal, shrieking and sobbing all at once. The old man froze, not out of pain, but out of alarm.
This wasn't the fear of a scolded child. This was terror, born from something deeper, sharper. It took long minutes for her to exhaust herself, her cries tapering into ragged breaths. She clung to the fabric of his kimono, trembling, and then the words spilt out in broken pieces. Between hiccups and tears, she told him, "Mom and Dad gave me away. That doctor will find me. Please don't take me to the police." At that moment, he understood. She wasn't just lost. She was running, not from neglect, not from some careless guardian, but from something far worse. And whether he was ready for it or not, she had chosen him as the one safe harbor in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Days passed. New sounds no longer made Mahou flinch. Now it was often followed by the soft sound of her small feet padding to the kitchen, where she would, unbidden, begin sorting through the vegetables, her movements still precise and cautious, as if expecting the peace to shatter. A month slipped quietly into the next, and the routine between Hiroshi and Mahou settled into something almost domestic. She was initially timid, always hovering at the edge of his presence like a shadow. But gradually, she began to find small ways to belong in his space. She swept the narrow hallways without being asked, wiped down the low table in the evenings, and folded his laundry with tiny, careful hands. At first, he tried to stop her, muttering that she was too young to be burdened with such things, but she would only bow her head and insist. She seemed to need the tasks, as though each chore was proof she had the right to stay. Evenings became their time together. She would curl beside him on the worn tatami, watching old dramas on the television, or nibbling on the sweets he pretended he bought by accident. She rarely spoke of herself, but she would hum sometimes under her breath, soft little fragments of a lullaby she must have carried from some half-forgotten memory. It was during those moments that he'd pet her head extra softly, hoping it would somehow convey the message, "You're safe here." Still, he knew the world outside his walls hadn't forgotten her. She had no records, no quirk registration, no school to ground her in society. One evening after dinner, he broached the subject gently. "You'll need to have your quirk registered sooner or later," he said, pouring her a cup of barley tea. "And school, too." Her chopsticks slipped from her hand, clattering onto the bowl. She stared at him wide-eyed before shaking her head furiously. "No school, no papers, please. You can't stay cooped up here forever. Children your age should be in classrooms with friends, with teachers." She shook her head so hard her hair whipped across her face. "No school, no names. If they find me, they'll take me away again." Hiroshi's patience frayed at last. "So what then? You want to hide here the rest of your life?" His voice was harsher than he intended, and she broke. Throwing herself at his knees, she pleaded through tears, her voice high and raw. "I'll do everything. Everything, I promise. I'll clean the whole house. I'll wash your clothes every day. I'll never cause trouble. Just don't send me to school. Please, I can't. I can't go." The sight of her, so small, so desperate, cut through his anger in an instant. He had snapped, because he was afraid for her, but all she saw was another threat to push her out of safety. Slowly, he laid a weathered hand on her hair, smoothing it down, as her sobs shook against him. All right, he murmured, voice rough with guilt. "No school, not if you're not ready." She stilled, glancing up at him with eyes red-rimmed but hopeful. He let out a heavy breath, the kind that came before decisions you knew would change things. If she could not go out into the world yet, perhaps he could bring a piece of the world to her. "We'll do it here then," he said. "I'll teach you myself, reading, writing, and sums. You'll learn, but on your terms. No one needs to know." For the first time since she arrived, her tears broke into something like a smile. It was small, fragile as a flickering flame, but real. And in that moment Hiroshi knew he had quietly accepted a role he'd never expected. Guardian, teacher, perhaps even a father. The next day, the old man took her to the building a few blocks away. This one was bigger, cleaner than the one they lived in. "What's this?" Mahou asked, gripping his hand tighter as they walked in. Thankfully, she now knew that not all lifts led to the doctor. "We're gonna get you some books," he replied, giving her a small smile. "Can't teach you without them, can I?" The word books softened the furrow in her brow, though she still glanced at the tall front door like it might swallow her. The elevator dinged on the 5th floor before it opened. The grandpa, as she had started calling him, rang the doorbell. It opened to reveal two familiar faces, a man and a woman, both wearing glasses. The man had black hair and electric blue eyes, and the woman had dark blue hair with dark brown eyes. "Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Takahashi. Hope I didn't disturb you both too much." "Oh, good morning, Mr. Tanaka. Don't worry, we have Sundays off," the woman smiled, glancing at the little girl looking at them with wide yet curious eyes. The old man followed the woman's gaze, looking down at his granddaughter fondly. "This is Mahou," he introduced. The woman nodded in understanding. Hiroshi had called them beforehand and explained the situation. "Hello, Mahou," the lady greeted, but the little girl scurried behind the old man, hiding behind his leg. "She's a little shy," the old man explained, rubbing the back of his neck. The woman's smile didn't falter. "That's all right," she said softly, lowering her voice just a touch, as if to make it less intimidating. "Plenty of time to get used to new faces." She stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Why don't you both come in? I've set the kettle on." The new grandpa and child entered the Takahashi residence. He could smell some fancy tea brewing in the kitchen. Books about doctor stuff and rockets all lined up neatly on the shelves. The husband, Daisuke Takahashi, smiled at Hiroshi. "Good morning, Mr. Tanaka. Hope you're easing up on those cigarettes," Daisuke warned playfully. Yeah, doctor," the old man rolled his eyes, "but just so you know, I ain't quitting." Daisuke chuckled, shaking his head as he set down the newspaper he'd been reading. Stubborn as ever. His eyes flicked to Mahou, still clutching Hiroshi's coat with tiny fingers, her gaze darting between the unfamiliar adults and the floor. "And this must be the young lady. Welcome, Mahou." Hiroshi gave her an encouraging pat on the back, but the girl only pressed closer against his leg. "Told you," Hiroshi muttered, half apologetic, half amused. The doctor's wife, Aiko Takahashi, returned with a tray, the gentle clinking of porcelain filling the silence. "That's all right. Shy girls often turn out to be the brightest." She placed some sweets on the low table, then crouched slightly so her eyes were level with the girls. "Would you like some hot chocolate, sweetheart?" As if the words were in another language. Hot chocolate. She hadn't had that before. Still, she said nothing, her hands twisting tighter into the old man's trousers. Hiroshi chuckled under his breath. "Don't worry about her. She'll come around when her stomach does." Well, the woman smiled knowingly, straightening up. "I'll make some anyway, just in case." She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving the soft sound of a kettle humming. The little girl risked a glance at the shelves again. Rows of thick books and a model rocket perched on top. Her eyes lingered. Daisuke noticed, his brow lifting. "Interested in rockets, are you?" he asked gently.
Her head ducked down immediately, as if she'd been caught stealing. Hiroshi placed a steady hand on her shoulder. She's curious about all kinds of things. Just haven't learned the words for asking yet. Daisuke's expression softened. He didn't push further, only said, "Well, that's a good thing. Curiosity keeps us alive. Our little Aimi is quite curious. I made the grave mistake of giving her a screwdriver set for her birthday, and she opened up our toaster." The men laughed at the story, but Hiroshi's eyes flicked down as Mahou's fingers finally loosened from his pants. Footsteps padded down the stairs, light but purposeful. Daisuke's grin widened even before the figure appeared. "What's all the fuss?" A girl about Mahou's age stepped into view, a screwdriver dangling from her fingers like an extension of her hand. Dark blue hair framed a sharp, calculating stare, the same eyes as her father, only colder. "Oh, Aimi." Daisuke's voice was warm with pride. "Finished repairing that tablet?" She folded her arms. "I wasn't repairing it. I was rewriting the OS with my interface." Her voice carried the matter-of-fact weight of someone who assumed no one else in the room could keep up. "Hey there, kiddo," Hiroshi greeted, trying to keep the edge from his voice. Her gaze swept over him, cool and dissecting. "Good morning, Mr. Tanaka. What brings you here? Have you increased your cigarette intake again?" The old man blinked, choking on a half-laugh. "Well, what? No, of course not." "Good." She tilted her head, nose wrinkling as if she could smell it on his coat. "Because statistically, your risk of lung cancer rises 15-fold with—" "All right, Aimi," Aiko cut in gently, returning from the kitchen with a tray. Embarrassment colored her smile as she set down tea for the adults and 2 mugs of cocoa. "Let's not terrify our guests." She handed 1 cup to her daughter, who accepted it with a cool nod, then crouched slightly to offer the other to Mahou. "Here you go, sweetheart." That's when Aimi noticed the other girl. "Who's this?" she asked, tilting her head sideways, as if calculating the hex code of her pink eyes. Mahou shifted, suddenly hyper-aware of the cup in her hands. "Oh, this is Mahou," Aiko said gently, her voice a steady bridge between them. "She's new to the neighborhood." Aimi blinked, her brows knitting together for a second. She wasn't used to other kids hanging around in her house, not without warning. Her tone carried a faint edge of calculation, as though she were trying to decide whether Mahou was going to be worth her time or not. "She doesn't talk much, huh?" Aimi finally said, sipping her hot cocoa. Hiroshi chuckled nervously, scratching at his arm. "Take her a while to warm up, that's all." Mahou peeked at Aimi through her lashes, only to find the other girl still studying her. For a moment, Hiroshi thought the blue-haired girl might say something dismissive. Kids had a way of spotting oddness and circling it like vultures. But instead, Aimi's lips quivered into the faintest hint of a smile. "You like parks?" she asked suddenly. The question caught Mahou off guard. Her throat felt dry, but she managed the tiniest nod, the cup trembling slightly in her hands. The blue-haired girl set down her cocoa, eyes brightening as though she'd solved some private puzzle. "Good. There's one just down the street. I go there almost every afternoon with my friends. We've got a tree we like to climb, and a swing that goes higher than the others if you pump your legs fast enough." The purple-haired girl blinked, a flicker of confusion cutting through her shyness. "You can come with me today if you want," Aimi added, more openly now, folding her arms with an almost theatrical air of nonchalance. "Meet the others. They'll probably ask you a bunch of questions, but they're not mean. And it's better than just sitting around grown-ups drinking tea, right?" Mahou's lips parted, though no sound came out at first. She looked down at her cup, then up again, her eyes flicking between Aimi and Hiroshi. The old man looked afraid that she'd shy away again. After all, she hadn't been that open to strangers in the past month. But he was mistaken. I guess so," she murmured finally, her voice barely above the clink of china in the kitchen. He guessed that it was because of the way Aimi said it,
direct, unafraid, almost daring her. Aimee's grin widened, satisfied. Good, then finish your cocoa. We'll go as soon as I change my shoes. She rose with a light bounce in her step, the easy confidence of someone certain the world would follow her lead. Mahou remained rooted in place, her pink eyes lingering on the spot Aimee had occupied, a faint crease at her brow betraying the storm of hesitation behind her quiet facade. Hiroshi's gaze softened. For a moment he saw the fragile edge between fear and possibility balanced in that small frame. Perhaps this wasn't just an awkward visit, or a neighborly courtesy. Perhaps, if she could take even one trembling step after the girl who had invited her, this could be the fragile beginning of something she had never known before. Both girls left after a few minutes, their chatter fading down the hallway until only silence lingered in the room. Hiroshi cleared his throat, but the sound broke into a harsh cough that rattled through his chest. His ribs ached with the effort. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught Daisuke's frown deepen, and then Aiko was already moving, pressing a cool glass of water into his hands. He accepted it with a nod of thanks. The rim clinked faintly against his teeth as he drank, each swallow easing the burn in his throat, but not the weight in his lungs. This is the exact reason why I've been telling you to quit smoking, Mr. Tanaka, Daisuke said, his tone sharp but not unkind. Hiroshi managed a crooked smile, though it felt thin, stretched. You young doctors, always acting like you know everything, he rasped, the words scraping their way out. I'm fine. You're not, Daisuke shot back immediately, voice hard enough to leave no room for argument. And if you keep this up, you won't be fit to take care of that little girl. As your doctor, I advise you to think of this new life first. The words landed heavier than he wanted to admit. His fingers tightened around the cup, pale knuckles standing out against the ceramic. The warmth seeped into his skin, but it wasn't enough to drive away the chill crawling through his chest. He despised such moments, reminders that his body was no longer what it once was. Once he could drink and smoke through the night, laughing with friends in smoky cafes until dawn. Now even laughter came at a price, leaving him breathless and aching. I've been fit enough all my life, he muttered, aiming for gruffness, though the ragged edge of his voice betrayed him. Don't lecture me about what I can or can't do. Enough, both of you, Aiko interjected, firm but gentle, her gaze cutting through the tension. What's important is that we help this little girl. Mr. Tanaka, have you talked about getting her into school? Her question struck a nerve, and Hiroshi's grip on the cup loosened slightly. I tried to gently bring it up, but she punched and kicked and screamed until I gave up. Whatever happened to her, it was probably worse than hell. Daisuke leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. And what do you plan to do then, Mr. Tanaka? You can't just let her drift. That girl deserves stability, a chance at something normal. The weight of words pressed upon the old man. He let his thumb trace the rim of the cup, listening to the faint scrape of ceramic under his nail. Normal. The word was almost laughable. I've already decided. I'll teach her myself. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Aiko's brows knitted, her mouth parting in disbelief. You mean homeschool her? Yes. He met her gaze steadily, unflinching despite the storm gathering in her expression. She doesn't trust the world, and I don't blame her. Throwing her into a classroom full of strangers would be like tossing a wounded animal to the wolves. If she's going to learn, it'll be with me. Daisuke sat back hard, as though the air had been knocked from him. You can barely make it through the day without coughing up your lungs. How the hell are you supposed to play teacher? You're not trained for this. You can't give her what she needs. Hiroshi's jaw tightened. He'd expected this. The disapproval, the doubt. I may not be a teacher, but I know her better than anyone now. And what she needs most isn't textbooks or drills. She needs safety. A place where no one will pry or hurt her. That I can give her. Aiko's voice wavered between reason and alarm. Mr. Tanaka, do you realize what you're saying?
You'd be taking on all of her education alone. Her social skills, her future opportunities, everything would be in your hands. Hiroshi took a long breath, his chest rattling with the effort. The cough threatened, but he swallowed it back, steadying himself. Everything she's been through already took her future away. I'm just trying to give her back a piece of childhood, even if it's a broken one. And if that means I bear the weight, then so be it.
The room grew still. Even the faint hum of the kettle in the corner seemed distant against the weight of his words. For the first time, both Daisuke and Aiko looked at him, not as a stubborn old man clinging to pride, but as someone staring down the impossible, and choosing it anyway. For all their worries, for all the warnings pressed upon him, Hiroshi knew only one truth. He couldn't abandon her. The girl had clawed her way into the hollow spaces of his old heart, filling them with a fierce, fragile purpose he hadn't thought himself capable of anymore. Whatever burden she carried, he would shoulder what he could. For the first time in years, Hiroshi Tanaka found himself living for someone other than his ghosts.